What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and we have yet another day of the Brothers War spoilers to talk about today, so let's jump into it. Now, yesterday I promised that we talk about Ashnod, so we're going to talk about Ashnod first. I have heard a lot of dissatisfaction, frustration, some friction on Twitter, at least with the folks I follow, around Ashnod Flesh Machinist? No, it's not Machinist. Mechanist. Yeah. Ashnod Flesh Mechanist. And if you're not familiar, she is a legendary creature, human artificer, 1/1 for 1 black with Death Touch. And whenever Ashnod Flesh Mechanist attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, create a tapped Power Stone token. And then you can pay 5, exile a creature card from your graveyard, create a tapped 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token. I actually think this card's pretty solid. Like, it's not amazing, and in a lot of competitive situations, you're probably just going to play it as a 1/1 Death Toucher for 1, which is actually a pretty good stat line. And the fact that it can ramp you if you attack and use it as a sacrifice outlet is actually pretty sweet. Because we have a ton of cards that care about Power Stones specifically, but also just artifacts in general. And this puts an artifact onto the battlefield under your control. I think, like, black-red, Oni Cult Anvil-style decks could totally use Ashnod. And possibly a pretty good effect, because you sacrifice one thing, you sacrifice one thing that may be an artifact creature, you then create the, it triggers the anvil, you create the Power Stone, which you can then sacrifice to the anvil to get some pings. Like, I feel like a Rakdos sacrifice situation with Ashnod actually works really, really nicely, which makes sense because sacrificing is kind of her bag and always has been. Now, the fact that not only does it give you a little bit of ramp, but it also gives you a sweet 5-drop ability that you can leverage. If you have creatures in your graveyard that are just chilling there, being creatures in the graveyard, you can turn them into 3/3 zombie artifact creatures on the battlefield. Puts more artifacts, puts three power creatures onto the field that you can maybe do stuff with. I think in general, Ashnod's actually pretty solid. Like, maybe not amazing, like maybe not going to light the world on fire, but I think she's going to be a really solid role player in a lot of decks. And for a rare, that ain't bad. Don't sleep on 1/1 Death Touchers. You'd be surprised. They can do a lot of work. All right, next up, we're going to be talking about Harbin, Vanguard Aviator. This is a 3/2 flying legendary creature, human soldier, for blue-white. That alone is worth the price of admission. 3 power in the air for 2 mana. Phenomenal. Like, it is a white-blue creature that has, like, one of the most aggressive stat lines I've seen in a long time. Stat line keyword combinations. They're a number of 3/2s for 2. I'm just saying, like, the fact that Azorius is getting one with flying, that's incredible. But wait, there's more. Whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying until end of turn. So if you have a situation where you're creating multiple soldiers, and soldiers is a supported type, like we have a soldier lord in standard right now. Well, I say supported type. There are a number of ways to create soldiers. They don't have a ton of support until now. This is actually an awesome inclusion in that style of deck. And you better believe I'm going to be building a deck around this. No, like, 100%, I just will. Because it slaps. I don't know what else to say. So if you have a lot of soldiers lying around, and I believe we have a number of effects and a number of creatures out there that actually create soldier tokens as well. So as long as you're attacking with at least 5 soldiers, and Harbin counts as one of them, so then your whole team gets +1/+1 and flying. It doesn't just buff the soldiers. Like, this is awesome. Like, I think this is absolutely fantastic. In the early game, it's a powerful body that puts your opponent on a very real clock that they're going to have to answer super fast. And if they don't answer it, it's going to make the whole rest of the team almost impossible to deal with. Oh, and by the way, it's in Esper colors, so you can rock it alongside Rafine. Just saying. Yeah, Harbin is great. Straight up, 100% fantastic. All right, next up, we have Rust Goliath. Now, this card is not particularly amazing, but I think it's pretty darn good. And one of the things that makes it pretty darn good is the fact that it's a freaking comet. So let's get into it. It's a 10/10 reach trample for 10. Artifact creature construct, 10 generic mana. Just, it's big, it's dumb, it attacks well, it blocks well, and it's an artifact for all that shenanigans. And it's a 10 power creature. Holy cow. Now, if you pay for its prototype cost, 3 green, you get a 3/5 reach trampler. So the 3/5 Reach Trampler is significantly worse than the 10/10, but as we've talked about with other prototype creatures, this creature is blink eligible. So if you were to blink it, you would get a 10/10 Reach Trampler. So that's pretty rad. Yeah, I think this card is like way better than it looks. Also, if you are reanimating it, if you're cheating it out, I mean, Titan of Industry, I think, is still significantly better because of its ETB, but at the same time, like, I'm already comparing it to that just because of how big it is and the fact that it can block and attack so darn effectively. So I actually really like this card. I would be shocked. Like, I don't know the Pauper format very well, but I'd be shocked if this doesn't see play in Pauper. Like, I just think this card is awesome. And the fact that there are a lot of cards like this with Prototype, freaking sweet. I just like Prototype. What can I say? Speaking of Prototype, Arcane Proxy. That's right. Wizards is officially printing proxies. I mean, well, we already knew that. They kind of teased this, I suppose. Of course, that's a joke that's flying around all of social media right now. Is what it is. Arcane Proxy. 4/3 for 7 colorless. Artifact creature wizard. It's a freaking wizard. When Artifact Proxy enters the battlefield, sorry, Arcane Proxy enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Arcane Proxy's power from your graveyard. Copy that card, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So after you've already Arcane Bombardment your other prototype creature, you can prototype Arcane Proxy down for 1 blue, get a 2/1 prototype creature, pull the Arcane, the Arcane, the Planner Incision out of your graveyard, blink Arcane Proxy with it, all of a sudden you have a 4/3 with a +1/+1 counter on it. Let's go. Yeah. This is very much Snapcaster Mage at Home. But to be honest, Snapcaster Mage at Home is still pretty darn good. Like, that effect is awesome. Now, it doesn't have flash. If this thing had flash, it would be so much better, it's not even funny. But the truth of the matter is, you get a 2/1 for 3, and you get to cast a 1 or 2 drop instant or sorcery out of your graveyard for free. That's a lot of value. You could be getting 5 mana worth of value off this thing for 3 consistently if you have something in your graveyard you can pull back. So that's just awesome. Like, at the very least, this pulling back an impulse so you can help reload your hand. Like, that could be awesome. Like, not just like kind of okay, but freaking awesome. And the fact that it does so while putting a body on board is very, very important. Like, that's real. So you got to be aware of that. Additionally, if it's late in the game and you hit it for 7, you can drop it down as a 4/3. Granted, you like ripping it for 7 would feel pretty bad because the stat difference between 2/1 and 4/3 is not, as big as 4 mana. But all the same, you can free cast a 4-drop. So, like, if you're in a really bad spot and you top deck this, you can rip it for 7 mana and pull a Depopulate out of your graveyard and just totally stabilize the board, just as an example. So there are lines of play that this opens up that I think are just downright cool. So we're going to be able to do a lot of stuff with it. Most of the time it's going to be coming in as a prototype and just pulling like little cantrips and things out of the graveyard, but worth it. I mean, we have like cards like Fading Hope is in the format. It's good. I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. All right, next up we have the Temporal Anchor. This is a legendary artifact for 3 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 2. Whenever you choose to put 1 or more cards on the bottom of your library while scrying, exile that many cards from the bottom of your library. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. So this does not just affect the scry 2 that you get at the beginning of your turn from it. It affects all scrying. And so this effectively turns all scries into additional card draw, which is bonkers. Now, the downside, if you scry, put something on the bottom, exile it away under Temporal Anchor, and then somebody blows up the Temporal Anchor with an Abrade or some kind of shatter effect, those cards are gone. They're gone forever, and you have no access to them. It's important to note, the way that this is worded, it says, during your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. When a permanent card like this references itself, it is referring to the current permanent that is on the battlefield named the Temporal Anchor. So if your opponent bounces this, puts it back in your hand, and then you replay it, all those cards are still gone. Because as far as the board state is concerned, it is a brand new permanent and not the one the previous Temporal Anchor was referencing. Even though it is physically the same card. So you don't get those back. They're just gone. So that's something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, this effect is stupid powerful. I mean, so at the very least, for 6 mana, you're drawing 2 additional cards into exile with this every single turn. That alone is worth 6. Like, believe it or not, it absolutely is. Tapping out to drop 6, drop a 6-drop is difficult to do, and there are very few decks that are going to be able to do it in standard or other, 1v1 60-card formats. But like the effect is just so good. And if you have other ways to scry, of which there are a ton, all of a sudden those turn into card draw. Like this turns opt into draw 2. Like 1 blue, draw 2. That's the thing that exists now if you can combo Temporal Anchor with even something as simple as opt. So I think this card's absolutely savage. You're gonna see it a lot. Now, notably, you don't have to scry to the bottom when you choose to scry, but you're going to want to a lot because you can churn through your deck like crazy, and you still get to cast the cards that you tuck away. So, I think this card's awesome. Like, just straight up awesome. All right, next up, we have another card, another artifact, another legendary artifact that I think is freaking awesome. It is Urza's Sylex. This is a legendary artifact for 3. You can pay... So it's a 3-mana artifact, enters the battlefield untapped. You can pay 2 white, tap. Exile Urza Sylex. Each player chooses 6 lands they control. Destroy all other permanents, activate only as a sorcery. While Urza Sylex is put into exile from the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. In control decks, this slaps. You will want it. You will run it. It is absolutely going to keep you alive in the early game and the late game in a big bad way. Because you play it on turn 3, you rip it on turn 4, your aggroed opponent cries. Because everything that they've done up to that point is over. It's all gone. Now, in the super late game, it might be an issue because... you might have a whole mess of lands, and this does force you to destroy those. So it kind of self-balances in a way, because in the early and mid game, it can be really devastating, and you can time it in such a way that you're losing minimal lands, if any, and your opponent is getting really shafted. So that's cool. In the super late game, if you're in a controlling deck and you have 10 lands on the battlefield, which is not hard to do, by the way, like that happens pretty frequently. And then all of a sudden, this thing is much worse because there's a very real, very powerful downside. That said, you can not only use it to blow up your opponent's board, but also search for a Planeswalker and put it in your hand. You can go grab the new Teferi, for example, Temporal Pilgrim. That thing is going to be a house. And so in Azorius control, Urza Sylex into Temporal Pilgrim is going to happen a lot. A lot. Like, strap in. That is going to be one of the new lines for control, I think. And it's going to be really powerful and difficult to deal with. So, if you are running, an aggressive style deck, especially if you're in, like, Boros or Mono Red aggro, you're probably going to want to at least have a Braid in the sideboard for this thing. Actually, to be honest, given how many artifacts we're going to have running around during Brothers War, you probably want a Braid in your main. And this is 100%, this is enemy number 1. If the opponent plays this on turn 3, they're tapped out. That's your chance. Blow it up. If they get to untap with this thing, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Like, guaranteed every time. So, yeah, this thing's, like, incredibly powerful. I think this thing's actually really good. Also, for the record, I'm not going through every single card that's been revealed because it is a lot. I am looking at the highlights. You're going to hear me say this card is awesome a lot because there were a lot of cards that were either, like, uninteresting or just weak, and they're not. I didn't want to devote airtime to them, so I'm gonna be saying things are awesome a lot because the cards we're looking at today are awesome. Urza Sylex, awesome. All right, next up we have Saheeli Filigree Master. This is one that actually I've seen some mixed reviews on, but I like. So it is a legendary Planeswalker Saheeli, starting loyalty of 3 for 2 blue red. +1, scry 1. You may tap an untapped artifact you control. If you do, draw a card. -2, Create 2 1/1 colorless top tier artifact creature tokens with flying. They gain haste until end of turn. And then -4, you get an emblem with artifact creatures you control, get +1/+1, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So that emblem is looking pretty darn tasty, and it's also not hard to get to. It is only 1 off of her starting loyalty. So that's fantastic. Honestly, it's just really good. Like, but additionally, the emblem that you get impacts you for the rest of the game, because emblems can't be removed, and it gives all your artifact creatures +1/+1 and spells, artifact spells, you know, a 1 cost reduction. That's great. So +1, draw some stuff. If your opponent doesn't answer Saheeli, all your artifacts get buffed for the rest of the game. That sounds pretty good to me. And worst case scenario, you're the -2, you create the 2 Thopters, one of which can potentially stay back to block Saheeli. Yeah, or they can chip in for damage, go after your opponent's planeswalkers. Like, this could, like, snipe Wandering Emperor really nicely, so Saheeli might be a good answer to that. And that +1, like we were just talking about scrying with the names already escaped me. But anyway, it's been a long day. But that scry is great, and it also gives you, it gives basically one of your artifacts tap, draw a card for a turn. That's pretty good. So, you know, 4-mana planeswalkers are difficult. Like, they got to give you a ton of value. Like, Wandering Emperor is kind of a unique case. But right now, like, 4-mana planeswalkers in Standard are not well positioned. And I don't know that Saheeli's going to change that. But I'm intrigued at the possibilities. I think she actually has a chance to be pretty darn solid. So, I like the card. I think it's interesting. It does stuff. Is it artifact action? Which we'll see how well that's supported in general. But I think there's some good stuff going on here. All right, next up. Oh boy. This card this is a card right here. So this is an artifact for 9. When Portal to Phyrexia enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. This card's awesome, but it's super expensive. So if you cast this for 9, you deserve the effect that it gives you. It is a very powerful effect and it is cost accordingly. However, we have a lot of ways to pull artifacts out of our graveyards and put them onto the battlefield. In Standard, we have things like Invoke Justice that comes to mind. Casting 5 to play this out and also buff my team seems pretty good. So that's gonna absolutely happen. We also have, I mean, if you're in other formats, like the Mishra Commander deck that actually comes with the Brothers War, gives all artifacts in your graveyard on Earth. Granted, it would only stick around for 1 turn, but still, you can do stuff like that. Also, it's not legendary. So you can make copies of this. Just throwing that out there. Multiple copies of Portal of Phyrexia would be absolutely devastating. Absolutely devastating. What else do we have? Oh, in Historic and Explorer. In Historic, there's, I believe, Trash for Treasure, which is a red 3-drop. You sacrifice an artifact, grab an artifact from your graveyard, put it onto the battlefield. That's incredible. And there's also Refurbish, which is 3 into white. Return target artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. Just straight up artifact reanimated for 4. Boom. If you can get this into your graveyard fast and you get it out, all of a sudden, all the creatures in graveyards start coming out to help you after you've possibly wiped your opponent's board or at least taken a big dent out of it. So, yeah. I don't know what else to say. This thing slaps. It's very powerful. It's a mythic. It feels like a mythic. The ability to grab a creature card from a graveyard, not just yours, any graveyard at the beginning of the upkeep to the battlefield, in addition on to your side of the board, and it's a Phyrexian. I don't know if that's going to be meaningful. I don't know how much Phyrexian tribal support there is, but all the same, freaking cool. I dig it. Next up, we have a card that this is a reprint, I believe. Diabolic Intent. Sorcery, 1 and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. This card is incredible. I cannot believe they are willing to print this. I don't understand. This in Standard, everyone's gonna run this. Like, I genuinely think this is going to be everywhere. Because in your wedding announcement decks, you have little tokens lying around. In, like, the Rakdos sacrifice kind of situations, they're going to be tokens. You're going to even want to be sacrificing them. So if you're able to get additional value from sacrificing a creature, and then you're also getting a demonic tutor with no other downside, I don't know what to say. Like, this card is absolutely incredible. It's just, we're gonna see this. We're absolutely gonna see it. Even in standard, you're gonna see this. 60 card competitive formats, tutors are nowhere near as good as they are in other formats, like, like Commander, obviously, or other singleton formats. That's really where tutors like are most impactful. But still, even in a 60 card format, how many games have you had where you thought, man, if only I had this one thing, I'd be okay? The moment you add Diabolic Intent into your deck, most of the time, if you draw it, yeah, you just drew that one thing, whatever that is. Whether it's a piece of removal, whether it's a hasty threat, burn damage, whatever it is that you need in that moment, this can probably get you that. That's nuts. Straight up nuts. This card is incredible. We're going to see a ton of it. Just strap in. This is gonna be a thing. All right, next up. Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard. This is a legendary creature, human soldier. We were talking about soldiers earlier. 3/3 for green red. Already, we have a legendary creature with like higher on stats than its mana value. Great. Sacrifice Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard. Legendary creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. So it saves your entire legendary squad, of which you may have a lot because we have a lot of legendary creatures these days, a lot of which are really freaking good. So this is great. Like, and also, like, I wouldn't mind putting this in a commander deck. This makes a lot of sense because it can support your commander themselves, or your brawl, in brawl your commander, assuming it's a creature rather than a planeswalker. But in general, like in commander, this thing's a slam dunk. Like, just straight up. Even if it's just protecting your commander, that's probably still worth it. But you probably have a lot of other legendaries too, because with the advent of Commander, Wizards have been printing a lot of legendaries as of late. So a lot of great playable cards out there are incidentally legendaries. So this helps you out there. Yeah, I think this card's really good. It just helps save the team, and it gives you a 3/3 body on turn 2 that your opponent has to tangle with. So I wouldn't be surprised if even in some standard decks we see this. Like, there might be some Gruul aggro decks, or, like Gruul X aggro decks that want something like this, just because it puts a lot of power on board fast. There were things like Werewolf Pack Leader that did that, and, well, that cycled out, so here we are. But, yeah, so Hajar could be really good. Could be really good. All right, next up. Oh, this card, I love this card. So this is another, I believe, another Mythic. The image is a little wonky, but it's the Stasis Coffin. It is a legendary artifact for 3. You can pay 2, tap, exile the Stasis Coffin. You gain protection from everything until end of turn. So 99% of the time, this thing's going to be a fog. And for a fog, it's pretty expensive. However, it can also be a counterspell, depending on what's going on. Because when you have protection from everything, it means that you cannot be... Actually, wait a minute. Oh, it's even better than I thought, because it also forces... It would remove curses as well. Because when you have protection from a certain color or a certain card type, or in this case, from everything... you cannot take damage from sources that meet the requirements. You cannot have any permanents attached to you of those requirements. You cannot be targeted by any spells or abilities of a source that meets the requirements. So as a result, like, you have protection from everything. No damage can be dealt to you. Also, you can't be blocked by creatures that meet those requirements, which obviously, since you also cannot attack by virtue of the way the game is set up, that's a thing. So that's irrelevant as far as protection goes. But if your opponent tries to rip you with an Invoke Despair, pay 2, tap, boom, you can no longer be targeted by black sources. And if they were going to attack you that turn, potentially after, none of that damage gets through because you have protection from everything. Awesome. If your opponent tries to, so if they're targeting you, if they're attacking you, this just says no, none of that stuff counts. And if your opponent has attached curses to you, the Stasis Coffin would drop those off as well. So this is actually pretty decent. It's probably more of a sideboard piece, I would imagine. I'm not sure exactly what deck you'd want to slide it in against right now. Because a 5 mana total investment for 1 fog effect is probably not worth it on its face. You'd probably be better off running more spot removal to deal with early threats. But I think there's a time and a place for this. And in Commander, this is a slam dunk. Because, like, seriously, when one person's about to just pop off and do, like, super crazy things, this is almost like a second copy of Teferi's Protection. Like, you can just activate it and be like, dude, don't touch me. Like, but the difference between this and Teferi's Protection is your permanents aren't protected here. Like, none of your permanents get protection from everything. So if they wipe the board, this doesn't help. This only helps if they're directly interacting with you, the player. But all in all, I think it's neat. I think this is a really cool design. I like it. I'm probably gonna run some stuff with it. I'm gonna be that guy who totally pops this and makes people angry because it buys them another turn. Like, yeah, that's gonna be me. So if you run into me on the ladder, sorry, this is gonna happen. All right, next up, we've got The Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. It is a legendary artifact creature, Thopter. We got a Thopter type. I'm in. Let's go. It is a 1/2 flyer for 3 with flash. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator, Urza Battlethopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So that's pretty great. So it's already like a flash flyer that you can just throw in any deck and just rip. And then as you're casting spells, as you're just playing the game, this thing is gonna just buff up. I think this card is actually really solid. Like, I like it. I think it's just really good. Also, the fact that it has flash cannot be overstated. Right now we're seeing Fairy Vandal get played quite a bit in like tempo decks just because it has flash. You can keep your mana open, hold up interaction, rip this, and then it also gives all your colorless spells and artifact spells flash. That's a big deal too, because all of a sudden, if your deck is built around it, you're just draw go. You're playing your entire turn on your opponent's end step. That means, and all your creatures effectively have haste. If your opponent has interaction, they need to interact with it on their turn, so then you untap and they're tapped out. Like, it makes such a big difference. Such a big difference. I cannot state that enough. So if you're already running like colorless decks and like Historic and Explorer, this is an automatic. Just slot it in. So else, if you're watching this, put this in your Ugin deck. I'm not going to enjoy going up against it, but at the same time, it's going to work really well. Like, this card is like, I think this card is actually shockingly strong. I think it's gonna impact some stuff. So I like it. And it's a Thopter. Who doesn't love Thopters? All right, so last up so far for today, we have Tokazia, Dig Site Mentor. This is a legendary creature, human artificer for 1 green, white, blue. Creatures you control have vigilance and tap surveil 1. They also have the ability 2 green, green, white, white, blue, blue. Exile Tokazia, Dig Site Mentor from your graveyard. Return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So 4/3 for 4 in 3 colors, not necessarily awesome. However, it promotes an interesting deck building idea. I'll be completely frank. This card doesn't seem amazing to me. If you had said that this was a card that was designed to fit like in Commander, I would absolutely buy it. This doesn't feel like a standard card to me at all. I'd be more than happy to be wrong on that. But I think what's probably going to happen with this card is it's going to be played a lot in Brawl. It's going to be played a lot in Commander, and I don't know, it might be like a one of in some kind of deck that doesn't currently exist in Standard, but I don't think so. Because stat-wise, she's not great. 4/3 for 4, meh. The fact that it gives all creatures who control vigilance, that's something. Like, that's not messing around. And they also have tap Surveil 1. The reason that Surveil 1 is so important is, well, it helps you fill your graveyard. Like, that may sound obvious, but it's a big deal. You need to fill your graveyard for certain archetypes to pop, and if you're going to get good value out of Tokazia's activated ability. Because if she ends up in your graveyard and you already have a bunch of other artifacts and you have the ability to rip that activation, which will be very difficult to do. It just will. It's also it's no mistake, I don't think, that the activation is primarily colored mana, because Power Stones will only help you up to 2. The rest of it has to come from some other source. So that's a little bit of a bummer. Like, if Power Stones could handle some of the weight here, that would help a lot. But they're going to be, like, not ineffective, but I mean, not great. Like they're not going to be helping too much. So if you have Power Stones lying around, you need to come up with 6 other mana. You know, in a competitive game, that's going to be really tough to do. So unless there is some specific combo that this helps set up, I don't think we're going to see it in Standard. But all the same, I think the design is neat. And flavorfully, this card is just top notch. So as a dig site mentor, as the Elder Scholar on a dig site, the fact that all other creatures and Takazia herself, because it doesn't say other, it says creatures you control have vigilance and tap Surveil 1. They can all check the area and put things in your graveyard. You know, they look at the top card, you can put it in the yard. So you can fill your graveyard. It also helps give you card selection. That's a big deal. And the fact that they have vigilance, you can still attack with them, and then if they survive, you can still do the thing. Actually, you can still do the thing anyway, even if they don't, because you can do it at instant speed, which is nice. So you get killer card selection, you can help fill up your yard, and the dig site mentor, the head of the operations, encourages the others to do their part and help out and help uncover the secrets of the past, if you will. And the fact that, you know, Takazia in kind of her last act brings them to the battlefield is kind of neat, because it's like, well, how do you apply the knowledge that you've learned through your scientific discovery? Well, you take what you've discovered and you put it into action. I like that. I like that a lot. I think flavorfully this card is really, really cool. I'm intrigued at the idea of building a commander deck around her, but I don't think she's going to do much in Standard. So, which I think is a little bit of a shame, but all good. In any event, thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate it very, very much. I will be doing more of these. Don't you worry. I also will be taking a little bit of time off in the coming days, but I do have some videos teed up in the hopper, ready to go, so the content will continue to flow even while I'm gone for a week. But if, like, next Thursday, you know, rolls around and you're like, man, this huge news headline dropped, I can't wait to hear what Ham has to say about it, you may have to wait a little bit. But the content will continue, I promise. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate it, and I'll catch you on the next one.